Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping straight in today because we are analyzing a massive, complex political succession unfolding right now in Uganda. And we're going to look at it through a really fascinating lens, Niccolo Machiavelli's 500-year-old classic text, The Prince. Right now, we're watching the eventual end of an executive era that's lasted 4 decades, as President Yoweri Museveni makes moves to pass the torch to his son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. But to actually make sense of the seemingly erratic, often violent strategy behind this transition, we literally need to open up Chapter 17 of Machiavelli's playbook.
Okay, let's map out our explainer for today. We've got 5 quick sections taking us from 16th century Italian philosophy all the way into the modern geopolitical maneuvers of East Africa. We'll hit the dilemma of love versus fear, Museveni's masterclass in power, the emergence of the new prince, the architecture of fear, and finally, what happens when fear crosses the line into hatred. Let's dive in.
Starting with Section 1, Loved or Feared? The Timeless Dilemma of Power. This is the foundational question from Chapter 17 of The Prince, and it's our framework for today.
So think about it. If you're a leader, do you want people to love you or fear you? Now, every leader ideally wants both, but Machiavelli argues that pulling that off is incredibly rare, and if you are forced to pick just one, he says it's absolutely, undeniably safer to be feared. Why? Well, Machiavelli looks at human nature through a deeply cynical, realist lens. He argues that people are fickle, they're greedy, and they mostly just want to avoid danger. They'll promise you the moon when times are good, but the second things get tough, they will turn on you in a heartbeat. And this comparison perfectly illustrates his point. Love is basically a fragile chain of obligation. Because people are self-interested, they'll snap that chain of love the moment it benefits them. But fear? Fear is preserved by a dread of punishment, and that dread almost never fails. Love relies on the goodwill of other people, which you can't control, but fear is a tool. It's something a ruler can engineer and maintain through disciplined action.
Right, let's take this out of the textbook and into reality. Section 2, Museveni's masterclass in power, the established ruler's grip.
Looking at this timeline, you can really see Museveni's entrenchment over 40 years. He didn't just inherit power, he earned organic legitimacy through combat. He took over in 1986 after a brutal 5-year guerrilla war. Because of that history, Museveni and his fellow veteran generals, the Old Guard, have this deeply ingrained historical authority. Over the decades, he turned his rebel fighters into a professional state army, the UPDF, cementing his power into Uganda's political culture. In the sources, he's actually compared to the Roman Emperor Severus. Machiavelli loved Severus because he beautifully balanced the might of the lion with the cunning of the fox. Museveni does the exact same thing. He consolidates power using calculated strength, not chaotic cruelty. He doesn't need to shout to make you fear him. His power is just understood.
Which makes this dynamic so fascinating. Uganda is currently projecting a very deliberate good cop, bad cop routine, as Museveni preps his son for succession. Museveni gets to play the diplomatic good cop. He is the Pan-African elder statesman doing African Union mediations, pushing for institutional consensus, and acting like the anchor of stability. His son, General Muhoozi, he is purely on the bad cop track. He's the one making coercive threats, running elite military operations, and pulling off these highly publicized crackdowns. It's a brilliant dual strategy. It gives the state maximum flexibility while making Muhoozi look like the unavoidable enforcer you do not want to cross.
That brings us to Section 3, The New Prince Emerges. The Dilemma of Regna Novatus. As Uganda looks toward a transition, General Muhoozi is stepping into a seriously complicated role.
Machiavelli explicitly warned that new rulers face a totally different set of dangers. He used the Latin term regni novitas, meaning the newness of a reign. He even quotes Virgil's Aeneid, where Queen Dido justifies the harshness of her border guards by basically saying, "Look, my state is brand new and vulnerable, so I have to be severe just to survive." Muhoozi is the textbook definition of a new prince. Yes, his dad has been in charge for 40 years, but Muhoozi's personal claim to power is brand new and structurally fragile. He wasn't in the trenches in 1986, he doesn't have that revolutionary legitimacy. And because he lacks that historical street cred, he's totally bypassing the traditional way of building consensus. Instead, he's launched this generational war of intimidation against the veteran generals who are telling him to wait his turn. You have guys like General Kahinda Otafiire representing the old guard, warning this younger generation to hold their horses. In response, Muhoozi's camp branded him the standby generator, this relentless youthful machine demanding power right now. He's literally gone on social media to declare that the era of the old guard is over, completely writing off these veteran war heroes as obstacles. Moving to Section 4,
The architecture of fear. Let's look at performative cruelty in the digital age. Without that historical respect, the new prince has to manufacture his authority through sheer intimidation. Here's where we look at figures like Cesare Borgia. Machiavelli idolized Borgia because his cruelty was selective and highly visible. It paralyzed his enemies and forced his subjects into line. Machiavelli argues that a few sharp strategic acts of cruelty are actually more merciful than being too compassionate and letting a whole country fall into chaos. You don't actually need to hurt everyone, right? You just need everyone to clearly see the one guy who gets made an example of.
Fast forward to today, and Muhoozi is literally translating this Renaissance-era tactic into the digital age. He's using social media to build an architecture of fear, broadcasting state-sponsored terror so everyone knows he operates with zero consequences. Normal dictators try to hide their human rights abuses, right? Not Muhoozi. He practices performative exhibitionism. He went on Twitter and bragged that opposition leader Bobi Wine's abducted bodyguard was in my basement. He shared photos of detainees stripped and shaved, comparing them to grasshoppers, which is just wildly dehumanizing. He mocked the mayor of Kampala after he was violently abducted and literally threatened to behead opponents online. Analytically speaking, this isn't just a guy rage posting. It is a highly calculated psychological tactic. By broadcasting his capacity for lawless violence, he's forcing everyone, citizens and political elites, to internalize the message: if you cross me, the consequences are immediate and they are catastrophic. Finally, Section 5, when fear becomes hatred. The boundary of Machiavellian discipline. Because Machiavelli had one huge warning about all this. A successful ruler has to balance fear perfectly, making sure it never ever crosses the line into outright hatred.
And whatever you do, do not touch your subjects' money. The sources point out this incredible insight from the text: a man will literally get over the murder of his own father faster than the theft of his property. Fear, you can sustain fear. But economic deprivation, that breeds hatred. It breeds rebellion. And this points to a glaring systemic vulnerability in Muhoozi's entire strategy.
A high-ranking military commander threatens to invade a neighboring country on Twitter. He calls for the hanging of opposition politicians. He posts photos of abducted critics, mocking them after they've been tortured in his basement. This is General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the chief of defense forces in Uganda. If you read the international press or follow his social media, the consensus is almost universal. He is an undisciplined and reckless rogue actor. But dismissing these public outbursts as erratic mistakes ignores a specific pattern. This violence aligns with a calculated political strategy. Muhoozi's path mirrors a political strategy documented 5 centuries ago, a manual for successors attempting to secure a fragile throne. Uganda's current president, Yoweri Museveni, has held office since 1986. His authority was built on the legitimacy of leading a 5-year guerrilla war to capture the state. Muhoozi is his father's chosen successor, but he did not fight in that revolution. He is attempting to lead an establishment of veteran generals who view his rise with deep suspicion. This is known as regni novitas, or the unsettled state. Inheriting power is more fragile than winning it, as the new leader lacks the organic ties to keep the network loyal. Without historical reverence, he must manufacture authority using alternative, harsher tools. For Muhoozi, the absence of revolutionary history is the exact reason he has adopted a strategy of manufactured terror to secure his father's position. Niccolò Machiavelli argued that while a leader might wish to be both loved and feared, it is much safer to rely on fear, as it is the only motivation a prince can fully control. For decades, President Museveni managed dissent through covert operations and deniability. Muhoozi has discarded that subtlety in favor of performative exhibitionism. When political opponents are abducted, Muhoozi utilizes social media to broadcast their humiliation, documenting their physical distress to prove that he operates above the law. He has directed specific public death threats at prominent opposition figures, claiming that only his father's restraint prevents him from executing leaders like Bobi Wine. Broadcasting this cruelty serves as a deterrent. It signals to the population that challenging the succession carries an immediate and catastrophic personal risk. A second rule for a new prince is to secure institutions by neutralizing internal threats before they can organize. Inside the military, Muhoozi's primary obstacles were the veteran generals of his father's generation, men who have spent years resisting a handover of power to the youth. Shortly after being appointed Chief of Defense Forces, Muhoozi forced the retirement of 150 senior military officers in a single purge. He immediately filled those vacancies with younger commanders who owe their ranks and their loyalty exclusively to him. These structural purges have reshaped the military, replacing the independence of the old guard with a command structure that answers directly to him. Consolidating power also requires the manipulation of external actors to establish regional influence. Muhoozi extends his intimidation across borders through unprovoked online threats, such as his public claim that his army could seize the capital of Kenya in less than 2 weeks. By threatening regional stability, he forces foreign governments to bypass normal diplomatic channels to deal with him directly to de-escalate the tension. By manufacturing regional tension and then stepping in to resolve it, Muhoozi forces external powers to engage with him as an indispensable actor in Uganda's future. But the Machiavellian playbook includes a critical warning. A prince must inspire fear, but he must avoid being hated. Machiavelli noted that citizens will tolerate violence and cruelty, but they will not forgive the loss of their property or their economic survival. Through systematic purges and public displays of force, Muhoozi has successfully marginalized his rivals and consolidated his grip on the military. Maintaining power through fear is a fragile calculation. It requires a specific level of deterrence that stops just short of provoking a unified public response. If these tactics shift the population from fear to hatred, the very methods used to secure the succession could become the primary driver of the instability Machiavelli sought to avoid.